They gave me 24 hours and the wrong man picked up the clock. They handed me an envelope like a menu and expected me to order my exit. Victor Lang slid it into my palm at the rooftop party like he was offering a polite tip. "Don't open it here, go home. Pack your bags," he said, polished and soft. He leaned in and whispered, "You've got 24 hours." The rooftop glittered, and the rich people smiled with practiced teeth. Melissa laughed with the exact expression she'd worn the week we signed the mortgage, and the laugh had been an investment then. Now it sounded like someone clipping coupons for a better life. Evan Hale was at her side, his posture calibrated to sell trust. The hand at her lower back was a clerical detail, the sort of touch that rehearses becoming a public story. I went to the bathroom because bathrooms are where men go to be alone and think. 2 associates left the sink with wet hands and a whisper. "She said she'll be done pretending after tonight." They passed a cocktail like it was an alibi. I opened the envelope in the parking garage where the fluorescent lights make truth look mechanical. The check was enough to help someone who was starting over, $25,000. There was a separation agreement, pre-drafted and neat, and a post-it with the hotel, a room number, a time. It was tidy. It read like instructions on how I should not show up to my own life. They wanted me to be gone. They wanted me quiet and useful as a memory in a speech. They wanted the story to be glossy and uncomplicated. The world they created made provision for a man like me to walk away and not complicate their optics. I drove home under a sky that threatened rain and felt my head fill with small practical things. The spreadsheet of our joint account, the receipt for the tile I had installed in the kitchen, the way the spare key lived under a pot because Melissa hated pockets. Our house smelled like someone trying to look warm for photos. I moved through the rooms and cataloged evidence the way a mechanic notes a car's faults, not because I sought proof for a prosecutor, but because I needed to know exactly what had been traded. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. She came in at 2, stumbling on shoes she would complain about tomorrow. "Babe, you should have come with me tonight," she said, like pity was a currency. I could have raised my voice. I could have asked for an explanation, but rage is a poor manager of evidence. I smiled and said, "Early meeting tomorrow?" She slipped. "Just work stuff." I didn't confront her then. I let her leave the door open so I could examine what she was leaving behind. Her laptop had calendar invites that used code names. Her receipts listed client dinners with hotel names tucked into the fine print. The car's navigation history had routes that didn't make sense for mere errands. None of this was cinematic. It was tedious, a ledger, a dozen small betrayals assembled into a pattern. I texted the number on Victor's post-it pretending to be Melissa and confirmed the room. Then I sent a message from my own line. "Keep the check. I'm not going anywhere." That was the first move in a series of small, precise acts. I woke early the next day, put a wrench and a clean shirt into a bag, and walked into the firm like a contractor with reasonable hours. People like me are invisible in buildings that believe themselves immortal. I fix air handlers, so I had plausible business. Leah, at reception, was a woman who had the look of someone who swallowed gossip and left a tasteful residue of it on the office floor. She slid me a sticky note. "VIP level, he parks there. He hates scratches. He leaves a gym bag in the trunk," she said. "Don't do anything stupid." I didn't want to break things. I wanted to make them crumble in the daylight where the cracks are easier to see. I placed a knockoff watch in Evan's trunk, a box of supplements in a gym bag that suggested private weakness, a small bottle of hair-thickening spray. In big lives, humiliation is a currency. It makes men suddenly very human. I also made a quiet interference, a careful half-turn on the valve cores that would let air leak slowly. I am not, and never have been, a saboteur. I am a craftsman. I know how things fail. The tires would leak by the hour, not explode in a spectacle. Panic is more useful than catastrophe. He found me by the pillars and the fluorescence of the garage, the way a predator finds a deer that didn't quite understand the season had changed. He put his hand on my chest like a man testing the speed of an animal. Vanity is a fragile thing. It breaks like glass. He pushed me. It was not a cinematic brawl. He wanted me to crumble. He wanted a fight that could be explained away as instinct. He swung. I did not try to beat him. It would have been foolish and dramatic. I let him show himself in front of cameras trained on the parking rows. He looked like a man who had not practiced losing. Security saw his temper, and not my calm. You can show the world a man's worst moment. It is harder to erase it than to manufacture it. When he stormed off, I smiled at the ceiling and thought, good. He made his own record. That night at the hotel, I walked into a corridor where contractors are ordinary and anonymous. I placed a phone in a pot behind a plant where it could see a doorway but not a lazy bed. I slid a copy of the separation agreement into the closet of room 1408 and wrote, in a hand that might pass for hers, a single line. You rehearsed this together, right? Paper forces narrative. People read paper and believe fate. They arrived like actors. Melissa in a dress that tried and failed to be casual. Evan with his tie loosened and a look that meant he believed in himself as a brand. They argued on the inside with the sort of small-stepped quiet that people keep for the dark. You promised me this weekend, Evan said. We agreed. This is the pivot. Don't blow it. It was merger. She was pitching an upgrade of herself. Become my public partner. Sell the polished story to wealthy clients. Let their combined cachet open doors. That was sin with a business plan. She had written my erasure into a corporate vision. When Evan left the room to cool off, I stepped into the hallway. People are easier to judge when they do not expect a husband to be present. I said, Hey, Evan, the towels are great. Everything settled in? He grabbed my shirt. He wanted to be the man who did not get touched. He lunged. He lost his balance against the wall. I did what men in the modern world do when a punch would hurt their case. I raised my hands and said loud and clear, I am not touching you, because witnesses are evidence, and evidence is a slow, relentless weapon. He lunged for phones when strangers took them out. That was a mistake. The hotel staff stepped out into the corridor and doors cracked open. Phones recorded like judges. He looked small between the suitcases and the floral wallpaper. I watched him try to buy dignity with violence and watched Dignity's receipt refuse to print. Leah sent the clips to 3 accounts with subject lines that read plausible and polite. I curated recipients like someone who knows how gossip breeds in friendships and contracts. Gossip can be surgical when it lands in the right inboxes. It does not need to be viral. It needs to be lethal to the specific men who vote on hires and partnerships and investments. Victor called me to his office the next day with the color of a man who knows how to buy silence and is surprised when the price rises. He had a glass office that suggested he was untouchable. I walked in through the service entrance and I did not raise my voice. You handed me an envelope, I said. You wanted me to leave. You wanted Melissa tidy and you wanted a story that could be sold. He smiled that corporate smile before it broke. This is business, he said. Transitions need to be tidy. Look at this, I said, and slid the phone with the hallway audio across his desk. He listened to Evan swear and to Melissa rehearse rationale like a woman reading from a pitch deck. He tasted what bad press feels like. He wanted to keep investors calm and the firm clean. He wanted plausible deniability. He agreed to distance himself publicly. Corporations protect themselves by making individuals the scapegoats for moral failures they facilitated. Evan got the call that afternoon. Panic has its own soundtrack. A man on a phone telling his wife it was all a rumor. A man on a call that used to be about next quarter and was now about what to do with a dent. He pulled out of the garage on a shady service road and cursed into the phone. The tires I had nudged bled air like a confession. He pulled over, sat on his bumper, and held the phone like someone summoning help that wouldn't come. I found him there, hunched over his hands, the arrogance gone from his posture. He tried to make himself larger and failed. He lunged at me with the heat of a man who still believed he could buy his way out of shame. He collided with his own hood, and the sound it made was the sound of a man realizing his costume was not armor. I slapped him once across the face, not to break him, to mark him, to let him know that his hands on me would now be remembered not as proof of my weakness, but as proof of his own failure. I left a note under his windshield wiper that said, in block letters, "Remember who you were when you thought life could be bought." It was not a threat. It was a ledger. Melissa had a condo by the river, a short-term lease, curated furniture, art that wanted you to think the inhabitant was intentional. I knew because I found a receipt in the glove compartment and a forwarded email address in a day planner. She opened the door with mascara running and a voice that tried to be brittle. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "You rehearsed this, remember?" I said. She tried to bargain in sentences that used to mean marriage. "You embarrassed me. You humiliated me. You made them see a scene. You could have left quietly." I told her what she had already lost. Victor had publicly distanced the firm. Evan had been cut off in the investor circles that had mattered to him. The friends who liked her for sparkle began to find the sparkle a liability. The check they thought would buy my silence had been moved into our joint account. Legalities are dull instruments. Leverage is patient. I had shifted funds. I had copies and receipts and the kind of small, bureaucratic control that looks invisible until you need it. She lunged and scratched my cheek. I did not hit her. I did not need to. I wanted the ruin to be hers and hers alone. I took Evan's jacket from her closet and poured coffee over the lining. I ground the stain into the fabric with my hands and then, with a small knife, I slit a seam in the lining. It was symbolic mutilation, not violence. It ruined an image. It made the armor of a man who sold trust look like a rag. She screamed and called me names that had been rehearsed for private fights. "You think you can take everything I worked for?" she cried. "I didn't take anything," I said. "I refused to disappear." She cried the way people cry when a dream is repossessed. I could have offered the 50,000 back, the tidy exit. I could have tried to salvage something. I chose not to. There is a kind of satisfaction in letting a person experience the exact consequences of a choice that used them. It is not mercy. It is a ledger. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. 2 women from her firm were there, phones in hand, expressions set like jurors. Witnesses are not always kind. That's the point. Their faces were the last thing I wanted her to see before the world that mattered to her heard whatever she said next. "You will explain this to everyone yourself," I said. It was not a threat. It was final. I could have stayed. I could have tried to make sense of what we once had. I did not. I walked into the rain and let the city wash the night's business away. I had documented, positioned, and exposed. I had not invented their shame. I only made sure it was visible to those who traded in reputations. I began to document everything, the way a man who owns a small mechanic's shop writes down oil changes. Names, dates, receipts, small betrayals stacked like plates. I printed copies of emails where Melissa had CC'd Evan on strategy documents. I saved GPS timestamps from ride shares tied to her meetings. I cataloged bank transfers that read like lunches but had hotel names in the details. Every tiny inconsistency made a lattice that could hold proof. Leah and I met for coffee in the alley behind the firm, the kind of place teams smoke in when they want to believe they are confidential. She slid me a photo on her phone of Evan at a charity brunch with a woman who looked like his wife and a man who looked like a future investor. "He juggles his story very well," she said. "If you want him to unravel, make it look small and true. Don't try to bury him in noise." She emailed the hotel clip to 3 accounts with sensible subject lines. For internal awareness, please advise, and FYI. The recipients were curated, not the masses. The clips went to people who could not afford the scandal. That was deliberate. Reputation collapses quietly when the right people whisper at the right time. I booked a cheap car with a temporary plate for the night of the hotel. No one remembers the contractor with a plastic plate. I scoped the stairwells on foot and found a service door that closed with a click, but not a lock. I positioned a phone and a battery pack behind a plant pot. I left a printed copy of the agreement in the closet with handwriting that might be hers or might be memory. Those small things have a way of seeming like fate once you place them. When I spoke to Victor, I didn't yell. Anger is something broadcast. Leverage is surgical. You know how this will look, I said, and he blinked like a man who had imagined headlines but not the machinery of evidence. He wanted to pretend he was surprised. He had not invented the story. He had curated it. He swallowed, and for the first time I tasted fear in someone whose job was mitigating fear. After I walked out of his office, I sat in my truck and wrote a message I would not send, a long, dry letter that listed everything and hurt nothing but the soul. I know your timesheets, your meetings, the concerts you claimed to be at, the nights you left early. I know the way you leaned into the room and made a space for yourself in someone else's life. I know the thing you thought you hid under brightness. I slid the phone into the glove box and smoked a cigarette until the ash ran out. It just lost its air. He pulled into a run-down lot and hammered calls into the phone like someone calling the police on their own life. I drove a block away and watched him from behind a row of sycamores. When he came out, his skin was red, and he saw me and tried to make himself intimidating. I could feel the exact second he decided my life was easier to ruin than his reputation. That moment is a quiet thing. You can almost see it in a man's shoulders. I slapped him because it would sting and then stop. People remember a slap like they remember an insult, and slaps mark a man as having been answered. He sat there and folded roughly into himself like a cheap suit. The parking lot still smelled like rubber and old pizza. I felt no triumph, only a workman's satisfaction when a job goes as planned. I wrote a short note and left it under his windshield wiper. It said, in block letters, "Remember who you were when you thought a life could be bought." It was not a threat. It was a ledger. At Melissa's condo, I moved calmly. I could feel her calculations stiffen into panic. She tried to use charm like a shield, and found out the hard way charm is only armor if someone believes you deserve it. When I tore Evan's jacket, I thought about the absurdity of cloth as armor for a life built on performance. It is a small cruelty to ruin someone's costume. Standing in the hallway with the witnesses there felt like standing on a stage and closing a play. I had no applause. I had only the certainty that the room would now tell the story without me. She had meant to write her own ending. I had simply handed her the paper and walked out the door. I walked into the rain and felt the city wash me in its ordinary indifference. The plan had been simple: document, expose, and let consequence do the rest. There is a quiet cruelty in letting people burn by their own matches. I did not invent the flame. I only refused to step away. They thought they were trading me for a better life. They forgot that some debts are paid in the currency of truth, and truth is a balanced.